guys, and welcome back here to the Data Realm, and today we're gonna be talking about variables. How can you use those variables? How can you access those variables in your Unreal Engine? So just to give you a little bit of a context, this series was designed just to get people and developers that just start with Unreal Engine. If you have no idea what you're doing with it, let's just follow the series along, and as we progress, we're gonna do much more complicated stuff. So see you guys in the video. Okay guys, so let's talk about variables, what they are and how can you use those variables. So if you're new to game development or even to programming itself, you don't know what's a variable, that's fine. So a variable basically is something that can store information. For example, a piece of paper can store a number. That's a variable. So the variable in that case is the piece of paper. So the value is the number. So it's just an object that can hold information, right? And as you can see, games, you can use this all the time, many places, and you can do all sorts of stuff you want here. So what I want to do here is I want to talk a little bit about what's a variable and how can you use those variables, okay? So if you right click on your game here, nothing gonna show up because the variables, just to give you a little context, an actor is also can be used as a variable, okay? But the place where you use variables is mainly inside your classes, all right? And here's where, so compiling save, I don't have this actor anymore. I'm just gonna throw arrow, that's fine. So in here is where you probably use, as you can see here, variables. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna create a cube, like a box that is gonna display and is gonna hide when the player touches the box and when the player is not touching the box. So we're gonna do that logic in here. So, and we're gonna do this through a variable, okay? So first of all, how can you create variables in Unreal Engine? Really simple. We're gonna open up our BP third person character, and what we're gonna do here under the variables tab, we're just gonna press in this plus button. We have created a boolean. Okay, so a boolean is a variable that can store true and false as a value. We also have some other options in that. We have byte, which can hold a very small number. We have integer, and we have integer 64 for very long numbers. We got floats for when you want to store health bars. We got name and string. You have text. This is more for widgets where you want to store long strings of text. Vector is cool. This is an option. For example, this cube here has the X, Y, and Z. This is a vector. So it's a variable that can store 3 values basically. And then you have, let's check here. We got rotator, which is you can store the rotation. And we have transform. Transform is really cool. Transform is the whole player reference in the word, for example, or cube or whatever. So the transform will be the location, the rotation, and the scale. So is a transform is 3 vectors values basically, okay? And then you have here structures. We got interface, we got object types, and then we got enum, okay? So I'm not gonna go too deep on this. I'm just gonna explain how you can access your variable and how you can do stuff with it, okay? So the idea here for this tutorial is I'm gonna create a cube that is gonna automatic hide and you know, it's gonna show and it's gonna be enabled and disabled using that variable, okay? And for that we're gonna use the event tick, which is not the right way of doing this, but it will work for this tutorial just as an example, okay? So first thing, important thing here is let's disable the collision. So let's select the cube. Let's go back to the collision presets. Let's make sure you have no collision, otherwise your player is gonna go all weird out. So if I press play now, I got here a very crazy cube. Let me just resize my window here just so we can have a more clean vision. Right. So the idea here is that we're gonna touch something, or even better, we're gonna press a button, we'll enable, we're gonna press a button, we'll disable the cube. I think that is the easiest way. Right, so let's set up in here first the trigger event. Let's disable that. So I'm going to compile and save here. So we're going to use here a key, how is it called? Input key. And what we want to do here is when we press V, okay, we want to do something with that. So if you can see this is working, we're gonna just create here example. So is V on press, and then we're gonna put V press here. Okay. Now I'm gonna press play, compile and save, and then we're gonna press V. You see that? V press, V and press. Right. So just to give you a recap, I just search for inputs in here, and then I just search for whatever the input I want. In that case is V, it could be G, whatever you want. This is just so we can have a way of interact with something. Right. So now what I want to do here is I want to toggle this variable true or false, and then based on the value of that, I want to make sure my cube is hidden or we can see in the word. How you do this? Right, so the first thing, let's rename this variable. So let's rename it, and the way we're going to rename it here, there's multiple ways you can rename a variable. You can rename in there, or you can just press F2 here. Right. So I'm going to call this variable, because it's a boolean, it's always recommended to start with B. Okay, I don't like very much this approach, but that will be like a nice way of creating booleans, because you always know the booleans is a boolean whatever. And I'm gonna call this is show cube. Okay, and you can see here there's this little eye icon, and this is basically what's gonna create the variable public or private. Just to give a little bit of a context, public variables can be accessed to anywhere. So let's say you have this cube, and this cube somehow has the reference of this cube, so I can see all the variables that this cube can have, like health or whatever, and vice versa. If this variable is set up to private, like in this example by default, that means that I can't access this using other classes, only on this class. There's one thing here as well I want to show, which is quite cool, is that if you click in that, in the details tab, we have the category, and right now it's default. I'm just gonna rename this and say, let's say logic, and now you can see that we have added this variable inside the logic category. So I'm gonna compile and save. Right, so how can we make this thing useful? Right, so the first thing that we need to do here is somehow when you press the V to make sure it's true and false. How you do this? Right, so we gonna bring this node here, and I'm gonna search for something called branch. Okay, a branch will be an if and else statement in normal programming language. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna bring this cube in there. You can also do something like this. You can bring in there, get, and plug it in here, whatever you prefer. And now what I want to do here is that if this is true, I want to set this value to false. If it's false, I want to set this value to true. And then I'm gonna, from those, I'm gonna create a print here. I'm gonna also connect this there, and then I'm gonna connect this cube here. I'm gonna get, connect in that, and there you go. Something very basic, nothing too complicated. So this is just so I have some kind of a feedback to see if the variable is true or false. So I'm gonna compile and save, and right now if I press V is true, V again is false. So we know that's working. So how do I control my cube? How do I make this thing disappear? Really simple. So we're gonna use something here called event tick. So event tick, right? And well, this is not the best way of doing this specific scenario. This is because event tick is called every frame on your game. That means that if you have a very complex logic, it will take a lot of performance. So normally you don't want to use that much the event tick unless you have to. Unreal Engine can handle a lot for sure. It's very optimized, but just keep in mind that event tick is very heavy resource intense, right? So if you don't have this, just right click in there, just search for event tick. So right now, what I can do here is just press print. And just to see how this works is if I press compile and save, you should see a bunch of text coming up there. You see? There's a bunch of text being, coming up. Right, so let's use this printing here, and why don't we do this? So we're gonna get a variable, we're gonna come in there. I'm gonna hide this print from here. And let's see what's gonna happen. So if I press play, this is false, press V again, now it's true. So I can see that I interact with something, but how can we make this cube appear or disappear? Pretty simple. Right, so now we're gonna create the same concept in there. Actually, let's copy this whole thing up, right? Copy and paste, plug it in here. I'm not gonna use those here, but now what we can do now is we can get the cube reference, right? So if you click on the cube here, you've got a cube reference. We're gonna drag to our scene here, and we're gonna search for something called set visibility, right? And if it's true, we want to make sure the new visibility is true. And if it's false, you want to make sure the visibility here is false, right? If you guys don't want to copy and paste the variable, there's actually a cool trick you can do, right? So if you right click in here, if you double click on the line, you can do that, and that will work exactly as if you have two variables in here. So it's just a organization tip. Alright, so let's press play here. So the cube is disabled. So if I press V, whoa, cube is back. So now I can have a bunch of variables in there. So as you can see, we are controlling the character variables just by this simple logic. So yeah, that's just basically, this is the base of this tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know it's a very simple thing, but if you're getting to start with Unreal Engine, this really makes a difference to put you in the right direction. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and I'll see you in the next one.